I fell down a bottomless pit, but that wasn't the worst part. There's a big chasm out back behind the barn, my cousin Todd told me the first day of my visit, sitting on the back deck in a pair of finely aged Adirondack chairs. We can go check it out after breakfast if you want. Yeah, sure, sounds good, I said, catching myself pulling off flakes of peeling white paint from the armrest, stopping just after he'd noticed. Of course, I knew about the chasm. It was all my mom had talked about when she'd been attempting to convince me to go out west to visit my aunt and my cousins. She'd been out to see them by herself the year before, and at first she'd hyped the cave as an attraction, and then once I'd been enticed enough to go, it'd all been about safety, safety, safety. We wouldn't be allowed to go into the cave, of course, since it was a straight vertical drop down into untold depths. Even trained cave explorers were banned from spelunking into the chasm since the unfortunate deaths of 4 cavers who'd gone in and never returned back in the early 90s. The rock was loose and crumbling, the experts had said, causing the climbers equipment failures and their subsequent deaths. I knew we wouldn't be able to do much other than look, but I was still intrigued. The pictures I had seen of the chasm, known locally as the Pit, were truly amazing. It looked like a portal straight to hell, a yawning abyss that gaped like a mouth in the middle of a rocky outcrop, dropped off vertically like a giant well. If the cousins didn't live in the middle of nowhere, they could have made a killing opening a roadside attraction stand. That's how bizarre this thing looked. The hole went down further than anyone had ever been able to record, even before the deaths of the explorers 30 years before. There was no record of anyone surviving who had gone down into the cave, since its unreliable walls were known to crumble and give way without warning. We sat at the table, eating bacon and eggs, prepared by my Uncle Glenn. Todd told his father our plans for the day. So I guess you don't want to go out on the boat and pull up some prawn traps, try to catch a few cod today then, eh? He looked at me expectantly. I looked over at Todd, and he kicked me under the table. Could we go with you next time instead? It sounds like fun, but I really wanted to check out that pit thing, I said, not knowing that my uncle went out fishing almost every day without exception. Yeah, I guess it wouldn't hurt to leave you guys here while I pull up the traps. Mary, Steve, you want to come out there with me? I could actually use a hand since I don't have this greenhorn out there to boss around, he said, shaking my head amiably with his hand, ruffling my hair as an uncle can only do when you're still not old enough to drive a car yet. I smoothed it back down and gave my cousin a mental high five. We'd have the place to ourselves for the day if my uncle could convince my brother and cousin Mary to go out and help with the traps. Man, I'm sorry, Uncle Glenn, but I'm really not feeling well. I don't know if I can handle going out on the boat right now, my brother Steve said. I hadn't noticed him looking unwell at all. I thought to myself, a little annoyed at the thought of their pseudo-supervision. They were 4 years older than us, and so they thought they were so much more mature than us. My uncle sighed and made a few dejected-sounding remarks, but ultimately he left the house in good spirits. We went down to the dock with him, and I watched as my cousin untied the knots which held the boat in place with the practiced motions of a young expert. I looked on in admiration as he pushed the boat off into the water, waving my uncle goodbye as we headed back into the house. After we'd raided the kitchen cupboards, eating the last 2 apple oat granola bars and a couple of overripe bananas, Todd brought me over to the pit on the other end of the property and showed me its grandeur. It was even more amazing in real life, and Todd seemed to have a great deal of respect for it. Keep away from the edge. The rocks have a tendency of falling away without warning, he said, keeping back further than I thought necessary. I walked a bit closer and I saw him tense up. What a wuss, I thought, walking up to the flimsy rope which encircled the chasm. A placard was mounted, and I walked over to it, thinking it would give some information about the giant hole that we stood in front of, but instead it was a memorial to the deceased, who had never returned from their spelunking expedition to the pit nearly 30 years before. In loving memory, let us not forget Reynold Breinhold, March 1958, August 1990. Stephen Fox, September 1959, August 1990. Jeremy Fox, October 1961, August 1990. Kelly Richardson, September 1963, August 1990. Beside the placard was a laminated black and white picture of the pit from the 1990s. The chasm was about half the size of what it looked to be today, and it had somehow grown considerably. Wow, so I guess that was 30 years ago this month that all those people died, I said, looking back at my cousin. He had taken another step back and now seemed almost comically far away from the hole. For some reason, I felt like I was suddenly too close now. The ground seemed to shake imperceptibly beneath my feet as my eyes widened, and then he looked past me. The ground just in front of me suddenly fell away, and a chunk the size of a manhole cover broke off and vanished into the pit. I looked down and saw my feet were suddenly less than 2 feet away from the edge, the safety rope suddenly seeming much less safe. The subtle shaking stopped as quickly as it started, and I backed away from the edge towards my cousin. Something seemed wrong, very wrong, about the whole situation. My cousin was trembling, clearly disturbed as well. I kept waiting for the sound of the giant rock that had fallen into the pit, waiting for the loud crash that would show with mathematical precision the depths of the cave. I waited for the crash to echo up from the depths of the pit, but it never came. I looked down and saw a crack had grown beneath my feet, stretching out from the edge of the pit towards my cousin's house. I stepped away from it instinctively, subconsciously. Step on a crack, break your mother's back. My cousin grabbed my hand with his, wet and clammy, and pulled me, rougher than I thought necessary, away from the hole. We ran back to the house and went inside, where he insisted on playing video games for the remainder of the day. By around 7 p.m., we were starting to wonder about my Uncle Glenn. He'd been gone for almost 10 hours by now. And Todd said usually he'd be back by supper by this point, unless he'd stopped by a friend's place, which was always a possibility. Todd called him up on the radio. "Hey, Dad, you coming home soon? I'm hungry." "Hey, bud, sorry, I went over to Johnny's place, kind of lost track of time here. Now, there's a storm rolling in, and the water's looking pretty choppy. I might have to stay the night here if it doesn't clear up soon." The radio cut out abruptly. "Dad, you there?" "Yeah, I'm here. Do you think..." The radio crackled and static buzzed. "Yourselves for dinner tonight?" "Yeah, Dad, we'll figure something out." Static was louder now. He hung up the handset. We sat for a while and tried to figure out something to eat. Steve and Mary were nowhere to be seen, leaving us slightly concerned, but we knew they could take care of themselves. I looked outside and saw dark, black-gray clouds coming in from the distance. I had never seen clouds that looked like that back home. They looked nasty, full of destruction. Thunder and lightning boomed. Suddenly it was pouring rain outside. The back deck instantly flooded with water dripped from a hole in the ceiling into a pot that had already been set aside just for the purpose of catching its drops. Tink, 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 tink. Steve and Mary were back later that night, stinking of weed smoke and hard alcohol, after we had settled in on a dinner of KD and some marginally soft saltines we found open in the cupboard. My cousin assured me we were going grocery shopping in town the next day. My stomach rumbled, but I politely told him I was actually really full and it was okay. I went to bed hungry that night and realized it was the first time in my life I'd done so. I was surprised to find myself feeling sad for my cousin and guilty of the privileged life I had back home. It made me feel like terrible thinking my cousin and his family lived like this all the time, on the verge of having nothing to eat. I fell asleep fitfully, unable to get comfortable with the sound of rain outside and the occasional unheralded clap of thunder. The ground seemed to shake with each crash outside of thunder, and I eventually drifted off into a deep sleep. In my dream, I was in a cave. The air was moist and it was difficult to see, almost pitch black, except for a light far in the distance. Although I really couldn't make anything out, I could feel my feet sticking to the ground, and I realized with alarm that I was stuck in midnight black mud. I tried to move my feet and found that they came up with an effort. I pulled them up one after another and moved towards the light in the distance. Suddenly a giant boulder broke off from high above me and I dove out of the way, finding myself lying face down in black mud. I was stuck, unable to move. I felt a rock under my left hand and closed a fist around it. With great effort, I managed to claw a few inches out of the mud. Pulled my other arm out, grabbing the rock, climbing out of the mud, pulling my legs as I stood up. I walked forward and eventually felt the ground harden a bit beneath my feet. The light was closer now and the mud less tenacious. I moved forward with purpose, covered in black, caked-on mud, and struggling to breathe as it covered my mouth, nose, and eyes. I tried to wipe it away, but only ended up with more black mud in my eyes. As I got closer to the light, I heard the sound of waves crashing. My feet were soon stumbling out onto a white sandy beach. It was a small cove, encircled by towering white cliffs, with jungle all around the entrance to the cave. It was beautiful. The water crystal clear and blue. The pool of water in the inlet was small, shaped like a rough circle, about 30 feet across. I stood at the edge, covered in mud, thinking how good it would feel to be clean. And I stepped into the water. As soon as my foot broke the surface of the water, I knew something was wrong, but by then it was too late. I fell head first, waking up as I did so, and I saw the ledge coming at me fast. I woke up falling straight down into the pit. I'd been sleepwalking, of course, and for the first time in my life, I had walked headfirst into a bottomless pit. Smart. The wall of the pit sloped in a few feet down, just enough to break my fall so that I didn't die as I tumbled and crashed down about 30 feet, 50 feet to a ledge, barely awake. Felt my jaw hit the ground. My arm instinctively reached out to brace for the fall, and my wrist flared in sharp pain as it took the brunt of the impact. I woke up to the world spinning. My mouth tasted coppery, and I realized my nose was bleeding, or maybe my mouth, or both. My arm was on fire, and I couldn't move it very well. My wrist felt like it was sprained, but maybe not broken. It took me a few minutes to regain my senses, and I found that I could hear a voice, whispering urgently from what sounded like a great distance far below me. It took another minute to remember where I was and why the voice sounded so far away and echoing. Hey, you up there. Hey, can you hear me? Hey. Yeah, I can hear you. Hey, yeah, I can hear you, I said, gradually regaining some of my senses. Good, the voice whispered back, sounding relieved. Glad to hear you're all in one piece. I must have been sleepwalking, I said, remembering how I had awoken just as my foot plunged into the cold ocean water in the cove of my dream, waking to find myself tumbling head over heels down into the cave, the chasm, the pit. My stomach lurched as I recalled the view of the rock shelf I landed on racing towards me as I fell. A moment later, I found myself vomiting without warning. Clear bile dripped from my lips as I coughed and finished retching. I noticed suddenly the smell in the air down in the pit was horrendous. It smelled like a hot sewer, like a dead mouse in a warm cabin left to decay for the summer, like rotted black potatoes, spoiled eggs, rancid butter, left out to rot under the radiator. That smell, I said suddenly, unable to hold back, forgetting our tones had been whispers until this point. The walls above me shook suddenly, and small stones fell down, hitting me hard on top of my head and neck. A big rock fell, struck my right shoulder, causing a stab of sharp pain there. I bit my lip, sucked in air through my teeth, trying not to scream. Quiet, the voice insisted desperately. This whole place could cave in at any second. I tried not to hyperventilate, thinking about tons and tons of black rocks falling down on me from above, pinning me, trapping me in this place with this smell forever. My cousin, I whispered, he'll come looking for me. He'll get us out of here. I said more to myself than to the man below me. Oh, good, the voice below me whispered back. I've been down here for a long time. I don't know. I can't tell how long anymore. I've lost track of time. My head was feeling foggy, full of pressure. A 7-inch long gash above my eye, leading up to my temple. I felt it. I tried to wipe the blood out of my eye, but found that only made things worse. I pulled off my t-shirt, ripped a sleeve off, fitting it over my head like a makeshift bandage. I used the rest of the shirt that seemed relatively clean to wipe the blood from my eye and face, blinking as my vision began to return. Thank God for modesty, I thought to myself. I usually slept naked at home, but I'd kept my pants and t-shirt on tonight in case my cousin had to wake me up in the morning. Jordan. I felt relief wash over me as I heard the calls of my cousin up above me. I was about to call back when I remembered the voice down below and its warning. Down here! I yelled back up to the hole above. I saw the shape of his head black out a portion of the sky above for an instant before retreating back out of sight. His voice sounded frightened and bewildered. How'd you get down there, man? Are you okay? Yeah, I think I'm okay. My head just feels like it got bashed in with a rock, which I guess it kind of was, but other than that, I think I'm okay, I think. I'm not sure about this other guy down here, though. I whispered up to him. By the way, don't talk too loud. The cave is, it's caving in, I think. Shit, he said to himself. I'm going to go for help. Just stay where you are. His voice calmed me a little bit. He'd go for rope and grab the neighbors or whatever passed for the equivalent of the fire department in this saltwater swept corner of nowhere. Is he gone? The voice asked from below. I mean, is he going to get help? Yeah, he should be back here soon. I said back. Listen, I need your help. My leg is pinned under a rock. I can wiggle it, but I can't move it. They think the two of us, though, we could move it together. For the first time, I realized how hoarse the voice sounded, like the owner of it was dying or close to it. Back home, I volunteer at a nursing home and had occasionally heard the voices of dying men. The gurgling, strangled quality of the voice drove it home. We had to save him now, or he wouldn't make it out. The only problem was he was down there, and I was up here, on a ledge far above him. "There's a ladder," he said, as if reading my mind. "I don't know how it got down here, but I can see the outline of it leading up to you, and I can feel it down here. I think it goes all the way up to where you are." I reached down off the side of the narrow ledge and felt around for the ladder, thinking it was possible, if climbers had used this cave once, they could have left it as an escape route, should their clasps and ropes fail on the crumbling rocks above. I was about to give up when my pinky finger bumped into something cold and wooden. I reached down further and felt the rough, splintering frame of a ladder. "I've got it," I said down to him. "I'm coming down." I was wiggling my rear end off the side of the ledge when I remembered my cousin would be back any second. Shit, I think I should wait for Todd. He might not be able to hear me when I get all the way down there, I said, not admitting to myself that it was really that I was afraid to dangle off the ladder and blindly feel for an old rickety ladder, climb down to the bottom of a pitch-black chasm where a voice was calling from, telling me it's all right, not to be afraid. "It's not that," I whispered in reply. I want him to know what's going on, that's all. Just hang on for a minute. I'll be right back." "Please, it hurts. It hurts." The voice suddenly sounded more desperate than it had before, and its tone now was childish and insolent, whereas before it had sounded confident, self-assured. I didn't say anything back, trying to gauge the situation. My head felt foggy. I was having trouble thinking clearly. I didn't like the change in tone, but resolved I would attempt to help him as soon as my cousin came back. It felt important. I should tell him. The voice below made occasional pained noises, but stayed otherwise silent for a while. Finally, Todd's voice called down softly from above. "Jordan, I'm back. I got a few people from across the way. We're going to pull you out. We're tying the rope off up here, and then we'll send it down to you." "Okay." I called back up to him. I gotta help this other guy down here, though. His leg is pinned under a rock. I got a ladder down here that somebody left, and I'm gonna try to climb down to help him." There was no response for a few moments, except for the small rocks skipping and sliding down the sides of the cave above, raining down on me steadily now, pelting me with increasing frequency. "Look, Jordan, you need to listen to me. There's no one else down there with you. Think about it for a minute. No one could survive that drop. I can't believe you're even alive, but you are. We need to get you out of there. Look, I know you hit your head, and I think maybe you're a bit confused, okay? Let us pull you out of there, okay? Don't try to go down further. There's nobody down there." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Maybe I did hit my head, but I knew what I was doing. I wasn't confused or hallucinating. I heard talk from above and heard the quiet words head trauma and concussion featured prominently. "I'm not crazy. There's someone down here, and he's gonna die if we don't help him." I turned my head back down below me and called down to the voice below. "Just tell him your name or something so he'll believe me. If you're from around here, he probably knows who you are, right?" "He doesn't know me. I am from before his time. Older." "So what? Just call up there and tell him your name so he knows I'm not crazy. Or I'll do it if you're scared of a cave-in. What's your name?" do not remember. The voice sounded defeated, as if it knew what I would do before I did it. My cousin must have heard us talking, and I thought for a minute he had decided there was a second person down below. His voice suddenly seemed regretful and apologetic. Okay, look, I'm sorry, I was wrong, but let's just get you out of there and then we'll come back for the other guy, okay? One thing at a time, all right? He's lying, the voice hissed at me from below. He will leave me here as they always do. You must help me. I'm bleeding. I'm trapped. I don't know how much longer I can survive like this. Minutes could be my death. Don't you understand? I was tired of the debate. It didn't sound like the voice was that far down. I would help him myself. Now, not later. I had only been down here for a couple of hours, but that was long enough to know that this was hell. The smell of the rocks falling down constantly onto you. The wet slime of mud that permeated everything, making it hard to breathe. This would be my penance for a few bad things I'd done in my day. In the back of my mind, Catholic guilt said subconsciously. I'm going down for him, I said, more to myself than anyone else. My cousin must have heard it because he really lost it at that. If not for the threat of a cave-in, I think he would have screamed at me. He settled for a halfway whisper shout, which resulted in a barrage of rocks falling on me from above. Are you out of your mind? There's no one down there. Just stay where you are. You're gonna get yourself killed. His words stung even more than the avalanche of rocks raining down on my bloodied face, but I steeled my resolve, and swung my lower half off the ledge. A moment of panic set in as my foot searched blindly in the dark for the top rung of the ladder. Finally, my foot settled on it, and I found the next rung with my other foot, slowly, carefully making my way down into the complete blackness below. Above me, I heard people talking back and forth urgently. Clearly, they had decided I was completely insane and were coming up with contingency plans, since I wasn't exactly cooperating. I just need 5 minutes, that's it, I yelled up to them. I continued down the strange ladder, feeling the odd curvatures of it, wondering why and how anyone would construct a ladder in such a fashion. The rungs of the ladder felt ornately curved into shapes, felt each unique. My fingers felt along them with increasing curiosity as I made my way down. The vertical bars of the ladder felt strange too, and I ran my hand over the face of it. It felt like letters, only not from any alphabet I had ever seen. The grooves were precise, though, and seemed to form the sharp angles and curves, unmistakably recognizable as letters from some sort of alphabet. I tried to decipher them, but the light was too dim. I looked up and saw the hole I had fallen down looked tiny now, the size of a quarter. How long had I been climbing? I began to notice that the ladder rungs felt much more intricately sculpted as the ladder descended. In the increasingly dim light, I noticed they began to have formed features, and I realized at some point that each rung was an oblong wood carving of a different animal. This one felt like the wings of a bird on the left side and narrowed to the point of a beak, the other end fanning out into tail feathers. The next had the large flat teeth at one end, an unmistakable pancake tail of a beaver, an orca whale, followed by a bear, a squirrel by a hawk. No consistency or reasoning I could decipher. So close, the voice said, very near now, maybe only 10 feet below me. I was suddenly very afraid, my hands shaking as I prepared to take the next rung of the ladder. Whew, almost fell there, I said, expecting the voice to be oh so pleased to see me. It was, but not for the reasons I had expected. Yes, almost. I stopped suddenly. The voice didn't sound hurt or scared anymore. It just sounded hungry. I had a moment of clarity where I realized what I was doing. This wasn't right. None of this felt right. I looked down and saw that my eyes had adjusted enough to see the vague shape and face of the being below. Its skeletal form, long and slender, covered in ancient tattered rags that hung loosely from it. It was standing up to its calves in thick black mud that bubbled and looked alive. The creature smiled up at me with a mouth full of too many long, sharp teeth. As I saw its true form, I realized I had been tricked, that the mental fog I'd been feeling was the result of the powerful thing's grasp on me. I looked ahead at the ladder and saw the rungs were much thicker now, very ornate. They were no longer the forms of animals I recognized either. Strange humanoid monsters and winged chimeras. My throat caught and I struggled to swallow for a moment. I noticed the rungs currently holding me appeared to be rotting, their delicate carvings falling away in pieces after years of exposure to the thick, black mud covering the bottom of the pit. I resolved then and there to get out there as quickly as possible, but for a moment my legs wouldn't move. The ladder rung beneath my feet suddenly buckled and snapped in an instant. I fell, breaking through several more ladder rungs on my way down and smashing my face against a boulder as I hit the ground. I struggled to maintain consciousness, my vision filled with bright mosaic spots, and I felt for a moment as if I would pass out. I fought hard not to, struggled to my feet. The thing was on me in an instant. Its rotten black fingers clawing at me, snapping its razor-sharp needle teeth inches from my face. I managed to push it away. The only thing saving me, my tall frame and rudimentary knowledge of combat. I've never been a fighter, but I fought that day, though. I fought with all my life and pushed him off me with all my might. I tried to jump up and slipped on the mud instead, and had to scramble to my feet again. I looked back and saw the creature was getting back to its feet as well. We'd gotten a few good shots in, and I was bleeding profusely from a bite to my arm. The pain from the bite was spreading quickly with a dull ache. It began to throb in time with my heartbeat. I saw ribbons of flesh hanging down and realized the thing had pulled my arm apart like a paper bag lunch filled with hamburger meat. Strips of loose flesh flapped around as I moved my arm and felt bright, fresh waves of pain, worse than anything I had ever felt in my life. As the adrenaline rush was no match for this degree of wound, I realized with dismay I could no longer feel my thumb and index finger, and they were hanging limply with no response to my brain's commands for movement. The creature started towards me again, its black eyes shining in the dull light. I braced myself for its second attack, ready to fight for my life, trying not to lose hope, my chances of getting out of this place seeming less and less likely. As the creature got close, I lost my balance in the mud and slipped, falling to the ground. The mud seemed to have a life of its own and wanted to help the creature. I could feel it pulling me down like greedy hands, holding my wrists behind me. I closed my eyes and screamed as the creature bore down on me. And the last image I remember of it was coming at me with its sharp fangs, just visible in the dull light, already bloodied from its previous appetizer of forearm tartare. I waited for the impact, but it didn't come. I opened my eyes and I saw an image that didn't make sense. My Uncle Glenn was hanging from a rope and punching the demon creature in the face. The mud momentarily loosened its grip on me as if in surprise, and I pulled away from it, freeing my hands. "Uncle Glenn," I yelled, impossibly, unimaginably relieved. "Hey kid, I'm gonna get you out of here," he said, pushing the thing off into the wall on the other side of the cave. The years of pulling up prawn traps and rustling lingcod had given him a strength I had never appreciated before this moment. "What the hell is that thing?" He pulled me up out of the mud as if I was a small child and took the harness off that was around his waist and put it around me quickly. He pulled twice on the rope as a signal to the people above, and I suddenly felt myself being pulled up out of the pit. The mud hands pulled at my ankles and feet, and I felt as if I would be pulled in half for a moment. With a final forceful pull on the rope, I was lifted out of the mud and up, away from the bottom of the pit. I looked down and saw the thing was on my uncle, clawing at him with renewed vigor. I heard his cries of anguish and pain and felt immediately guilty. The creature tore away at his face with its claws, exposing tendons, muscles beneath. It snapped its teeth, finally landing a bite on my uncle's hand as he held it out to defend himself. I watched as the thing tore and bit at his flesh and then had him on the ground where the mud hands enveloped him as he screamed. He'd come down here to save me because I hadn't listened. Now he was going to die down there. "Grab onto my legs, Uncle Glenn. It's your only chance," I screamed, no longer thinking about the instability of the crumbling walls around us. He looked up at me and shook his head. I was up too far already, of course, out of his reach. I screamed up at the people above me to stop, but they continued to pull me up, thinking I was simply being difficult. I watched as he tried with everything he had to fight the thing off him, but the mud was all over him now, covering him except for his belly, where the creature began to feed, burrowing into his stomach with its sharp teeth. Gradually, thankfully, they faded away into blackness as I rose up to the light above. Rocks falling all around now, and a larger one landed directly on my forehead, knocking me unconscious. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. My arm had been amputated up above the elbow, and I was delirious for a few days. Started to come out of it after my mom flew in from back home, and I woke up with her frowning at me. Everything coming back to me in an instant. Like in a movie where the character has amnesia. It was really like that. I didn't sleep for 3 days after remembering what had happened. Just screamed and screamed until they had to sedate me with needles, and I had visits from psychiatrists, their bright-eyed young residents. They asked me countless questions, which I refused to answer until eventually they became annoyed, stopped coming around as much. I was discharged after weeks of care in the hospital, some physio and OT, which helped me begin to learn to live without my arm. Of course, it didn't take me long to realize that everyone was furious with me. Even though they understood I had a head injury before crawling down to the depths of the pit, no one seemed to really care. I had pretty much caused the death of my uncle, who had given up his life to save me. News outlets in the area reporting on the story couldn't name me personally since I was a minor, but the stories written about the incident were not kind when it came to the descriptions of me and my actions that day. My mom refused to let me give my side of the story, and in retrospect, I'm glad. I would have just been called crazy as well as an asshole. Anyone who took one look at me in those days would have called for my involuntary committal. I was constantly shaking and twitching, looking over my shoulders and scratching an itch on an arm that no longer existed. My hair grew long. I stopped shaving. I stopped eating the food in the hospital at one point. I think there was something wrong with it for some reason. It just didn't taste right. It tasted like mud. The cave-in made any chance of rescue futile. I had been lucky to make it out at all. I was told later as an avalanche of rocks had caused a collapse inside of a cavern immediately after I had made it out. My cousin Todd no longer speak to me, and I can understand why. Not upset. The rest of my family's pissed off as well, obviously, and gradually starting to tolerate my presence again, although I can tell my mom will probably never truly forgive me for her brother's death. She walks around the house with no expression on her face. A flat affect, as it's called in the psychiatric field. I have been told I have this lack of emotion permanently etched on my face now as well. I hadn't noticed. I haven't looked in the mirror for a long, long time. I'm afraid to look into any reflective surface. I try to cover up the mirrors in my house, but my mom uncovers them. Been told to stop, but I can't help it. Every time I see a mirror, I think of that water in my dream, my foot breaking the surface and falling down into the pit, spinning sickeningly head over heels, seeing the rock shelf racing up at me. Mirrors at night are even worse. They just look like that midnight black mud to me now. I keep a bottle by the bed to pee in at night so I don't have to go to the bathroom and walk past the mirror in there. If I have to go number 2, I just hold till the morning, no matter how sick it makes me feel. The therapist told me I should write this all down, how it's affecting my life, so that's why I'm doing this. She keeps asking me the same questions over and over, as if waiting for me to slip up, change my story, to reveal that this is all just truly a lie. And maybe start making some progress in our sessions. Guilt-free zone my ass. This is the truth. This is what happened. I remember everything.